My name is Nolan James Whitfield. I am 34 years old. And this is the story of how I learned that the quietest revenge isn't silence. It's becoming someone so steady, so grounded, so completely whole, that the people who tried to break you have to watch from across the room and wonder where they went wrong. I want to start at the kitchen table. Not the one we have now. Not the oak slab my wife Priya picked out from a salvage yard in Vermont. The one with the 3 faint rings from mugs that belong to a stranger we'll never know. I want to start at the old one. The laminate one. Beige with a crack along the left edge that my mother always covered with the fruit bowl, even when there was no fruit in it. I was 17. It was a Sunday because it's always a Sunday when families decide to perform themselves for each other. My grandmother Loretta had driven up from Harrisburg with my Aunt Phyllis and my Uncle Don, and my mother had made pot roast that nobody actually wanted because it was August and 91 degrees outside. But we had pot roast because that's what my mother made when she wanted people to believe everything was fine. I had been having a hard year. I want to be honest about that because this story only works if I'm honest. My best friend at the time, a kid named Jonah Brewster who I'd known since the 3rd grade, had died in February. Not in any dramatic way. He just didn't wake up one morning. An undetected heart condition, the doctors said. Here one day, gone the next. And I had not handled it well. I wasn't violent. I wasn't dangerous. I wasn't a threat to myself or anyone else. I was just absent. I went quiet the way a room goes quiet after a power outage. Everything's still there, just dark. I stopped eating lunch at school. I started sleeping until noon on weekends. I cried in the shower because I thought no one could hear me, and I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. I got a C in AP history for the first time in my life, and my teacher, Mr. Patel, called home not out of frustration but out of concern, which was the kind of thing Mr. Patel did because he was a good man. My parents took none of this as grief. They took it as malfunction. My father, Robert Whitfield, a man who has never once in his 61 years of living acknowledged an emotion that couldn't be immediately converted into a task, decided I was being dramatic. My mother, Linda, decided I was being difficult. And the two of them, in the quiet economy of their marriage, converted my grief into a liability. I didn't know any of this until that Sunday in August at the laminate table in 91-degree heat, with the fake fruit bowl covering the crack. I had excused myself to get more water. The kitchen was separated from the dining room by a short hallway, and somewhere in the architecture of that house, sound traveled in ways nobody had fully accounted for. I heard my mother's voice first. We're just not sure what's going on with him. He's been very unstable. Unstable. I stood there with my hand on the refrigerator door, and I heard that word settle into the room like it belonged there. Like it was true. My grandmother said, "Since when?" "Since February, really. But honestly, we've always thought there was something a little, off." My Aunt Phyllis said, "Is he seeing someone?" "We've been thinking about it. But he resists everything. Very closed off. Very resistant." My Uncle Don said, "Kids like that need structure." "That's exactly what we keep saying. He just doesn't respond to it. Kids like that." I want to tell you I walked back in there and said something. I want to tell you I set the water glass down on the table with controlled precision and looked my mother in the eye and said, "I heard you. And you are wrong about me. I want to give you that scene because it would feel good, because it would be clean, because it would be the kind of thing that happens in movies right before the music swells." But I was 17. And I was grieving. And the truth is I went back to my room and I didn't say a word. And I lay face up on my bed staring at the ceiling while the sounds of pot roast and conversation floated up through the floor. And I thought, is that what I am? Unstable. The word did something to me that night that I didn't fully understand until years later. It lodged itself in a place just behind my sternum, and it became a question I couldn't stop asking myself. Am I? Every time I cried, every time I stumbled, every time I felt anything at all, is this it? Is this the instability they were talking about? And then slowly, without my fully meaning to, the question changed. What would the opposite of this look like? I need to tell you about the months after that because they matter. My mother's use of the word unstable did not stay at the kitchen table. I found this out gradually, the way you find most terrible things out, through stray comments and shifted expressions and the particular silence that falls when you walk into a room and realize the conversation has just changed. My cousin Britt, who is 3 years older than me and has always had the emotional sensitivity of a smoke alarm in a steam room, pulled me aside at Thanksgiving that year and said, with the confidence of someone relaying a doctor's diagnosis, "I heard you've been going through some stuff. Mental stuff. It's okay. My roommate's brother has anxiety." My grandmother Loretta, who I had always adored, started watching me at family gatherings the way you watch a glass that's too close to the edge of a table. That particular kind of vigilant pity that makes you feel like a hazard. My Aunt Phyllis began asking my mother, within earshot of me, always within earshot of me, whether I was doing better the way you ask about someone who has had surgery. The story had gotten out. Not as Nolan is grieving his best friend who died suddenly at 16. As Nolan is unstable and we're not really sure what's happening with him. Here is what I want you to understand about the difference between those two sentences. One of them is about loss. The other one is about identity. And when you're 17 and you're still trying to figure out who you are, having your identity defined as a problem by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally is not a small thing. It is not something you just get over. It is a splinter that works its way deeper every time you try to ignore it. I didn't have a dramatic breakdown. I didn't have a redemption moment on a mountaintop. What I had was quieter than that and in some ways harder. I had January of my senior year. I had a guidance counselor named Ms. Adiz Okonkwo, who had an office that smelled like lavender and old paper, and who had been watching me from a careful distance since September, and who one afternoon simply said, "You don't seem like yourself. Do you want to sit for a while?" I didn't want to. I had places to be. I had the performance of being fine to maintain. But something about the way she said it, not "Are you okay?" not "I heard you've been having a hard time," just "You don't seem like yourself," as though she already knew who I was and trusted that person, made me sit down. I sat for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I just talked. I told her about Jonah, about the February morning when his mother called my mother, and the sound that came out of my mother's mouth, which was not like any sound I'd heard her make before, about how I'd been the one who talked to Jonah the night before. We'd been on the phone until past midnight, arguing about whether the Knicks had any shot at the playoffs, and his last words to me were, "Dude, you are wrong about Ewing's legacy," and I had laughed and said, "We'll settle this tomorrow," and there was no tomorrow. About sitting with a C in AP history, and feeling genuinely incapable of caring. About hearing my mother call me unstable, and not knowing if she was wrong. Ms. Okonkwo listened to all of this with her hands folded on the desk and her eyes steady on mine. And when I was done, she said something that I have carried with me for 17 years, that I have written in notebooks and said aloud to myself in the car and told Priya on our third date when I was trying to explain who I was. "Nolan, grief is not instability. Grief is what happens when love has nowhere left to go. What you're feeling is not a malfunction. It's the evidence that you loved someone very much." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded. And I thanked her. And I went to AP History and I wrote an essay on the social consequences of the Industrial Revolution that got an A- and made Mr. Patel very quietly pleased. But something had shifted. Something small and essential. I started asking a different question. Not am I unstable? But, what does it actually mean to be stable? Let me tell you what I thought stability meant when I was 17, and then let me tell you what I know it means now, because the distance between those two things is basically the whole story. At 17, I thought stability meant not feeling things. Not visibly, anyway. I thought it meant controlled responses and measured tones and the kind of even keel that my father embodied. A man who had not raised his voice since 1998 but also had not, to my knowledge, wept at anything, not at funerals, not at his own mother's eulogy, not when he told me over a gas station coffee that his dog from childhood had died and I watched his face arrange itself into something so carefully neutral that I felt frightened. I thought stability was a managed exterior, a performance of okayness. I was wrong about that. It took me a long time to figure out how wrong. Real stability, the kind I spent the next 17 years building, the kind that lets me walk into any room and feel the ground under my feet, the kind I want to tell you about, is not about the absence of feeling. It's about the presence of something underneath feeling. A foundation that holds even when the weather is bad. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the years because this is the part that matters and I don't want to rush it. I went to a state school in Pennsylvania, Penn State Harrisburg, close enough to home that I could go back when I needed to, far enough that I could breathe. I chose psychology as my major not because of any grand plan but because I wanted to understand what Ms. Okonkwo had done to me in that 45-minute conversation. That specific alchemy of being listened to without being fixed. I was not a remarkable student. I was a thorough one. I showed up to every class. I did every reading. Not because I was trying to prove something, or not only because of that, but because I had discovered, somewhere in the second semester of senior year, that learning things was the only activity that reliably made me feel like I was building something rather than just surviving. I called my parents every Sunday. The calls were 15 minutes, brisk and informational. My mother would tell me about neighborhood news and the price of things at the grocery store. My father would ask whether I was on track, and I would say yes, and he would say good. I would hang up and sit with the residue of those calls, the particular flatness of them, and then I would open a book. I made friends in the careful way of someone who has learned that connection is both valuable and fragile. My roommate sophomore year was a guy named Ashwin Mehta who played bass in a band nobody listened to and collected vintage maps and made excellent chai at 2 in the morning, and never once in 4 years asked me why I was sad when I was sad. He just handed me the chai. I want to go on record that Ashwin Mehta is one of the finest people I have ever known. My first serious girlfriend was a woman named Dana Kolosky, red-haired, sharp, studying environmental law, with a laugh that could rearrange furniture. We dated for 2 years. She broke up with me because she said, I was sometimes so deep inside myself that she couldn't reach me, and she needed someone who would reach back more. She was right. I wasn't ready yet. I hurt her by being unavailable in ways I hadn't yet learned to see, and the breaking up was painful and clean in the way that honest endings are. I still think she's a remarkable person. She works in environmental litigation in Seattle now, and she won a major case against a chemical plant in 2021 that I read about on my phone and felt proud of in the uncomplicated way you feel proud of people who deserve to succeed. After Dana, I started therapy. Not because of the breakup exactly, the breakup was just the thing that finally made the decision obvious. I went to a therapist named Dr. Bauman, a small, precise man in his 60s who wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation, and had a habit of letting silences go so long that you eventually had to fill them with the truth. It was in Dr. Bauman's office that I first said out loud, my parents told my family I was unstable, and I've been trying to prove them wrong ever since. Dr. Bauman let that sentence sit in the room for a very long time. Then he said, what would it mean to stop trying to prove them wrong and start just being who you are? I told him I wasn't sure I knew the difference. He said, that might be the most important thing you've ever said. We spent 2 years on that question. Here is something I learned in therapy that I want to tell you plainly, because I think it might be useful and because I don't think people say it plainly enough. The story your family tells about you is not the truth about you. It is a story. Stories are constructed. They are built from selected details, from the limitations of the observers, from the particular needs of the people doing the telling. My mother called me unstable not because she had conducted a thorough and objective assessment of my psychological health, but because she needed a way to explain something she found frightening and unfamiliar. And unstable was a word that put the problem inside me and outside her. This does not mean she is evil. It means she is human and limited, and that she had her own set of wounds that she had never examined, that she had grown up in a family where feelings were also coded as weakness, that she had married a man who had made a religion out of emotional unavailability, and that when her son went dark and quiet with grief, she experienced it not as something happening to him but as something happening to her. Understanding this did not make it hurt less. I want to be clear about that. There is a cultural myth that once you understand why someone hurt you, the hurt evaporates, and that myth is a lie. Understanding why my mother did what she did not undo 17-year-old me standing in the kitchen with his hand on the refrigerator, hearing the word unstable travel through the walls of his childhood home. That kid still existed. He still existed inside me. I still have to go find him sometimes and sit with him and tell him that he was not what they said. But understanding gave me something else. It gave me the ability to separate their story from mine. Their story. Nolan is unstable. Nolan is a problem. Nolan is off. My story. Nolan loved his friend very much and his friend died, and he is learning how to carry that. Both of these sentences are about the same 17-year-old boy. Only one of them is true. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in psychology and a minor in sociology and a specific focused interest in crisis intervention, in the science of what happens to people in their worst moments and what kinds of support actually help. I got a master's at Temple. I worked for 3 years at a community mental health center in North Philadelphia in a neighborhood that was underserved and under-resourced and full of people who were struggling with things so much larger than anything I had faced. And I want to be careful here not to use their suffering as a backdrop for my growth story, because they are not supporting characters, they are people full and complex and deserving. But I will say that working in that center taught me more about stability than any textbook had. Stability, I learned, is not a destination. It is a practice. It is something you do every day. It is the decision made over and over to stay present rather than run, to feel the thing rather than perform around it, to tell the truth about what's happening inside you rather than construct a more comfortable narrative. I watched people in crisis, genuinely in crisis, people who had lost everything, people who were standing at the edge of themselves, and I watched what helped them and what didn't. Here is what helped: being seen, being stayed with, being told that what they were feeling made sense, that it was proportionate, that it did not make them broken. Here's what didn't help: being told to calm down, being offered easy solutions, being talked at rather than listened to. I thought a lot about Ms. Okonkwo in those years. I sent her a letter once. I don't know if she got it. I hope she did. I also thought about my parents. Not with bitterness exactly, though there was bitterness sometimes, usually late at night when I was tired and my defenses were low, but with a kind of ongoing inquiry, trying to understand them, trying to figure out how to be in relationship with them without pretending I wasn't hurt, and without making the hurt into the only thing between us. This is harder than forgiveness. Forgiveness is often described as a single act, a decision made once and then done. What I was doing was something more like maintenance, forgiving them a little bit every day, choosing every Sunday phone call, not to let the crack in the laminate table define everything. I was 29 when I met Priya. I need to tell you about meeting Priya because it is central to the story in a way that is hard to explain without sounding like I'm making it about romance, which I'm not entirely. Or not just. Meeting Priya was the first time I understood what it felt like to be known by someone who had no prior story about me to impose. She didn't know my family. She didn't know Jonah. She didn't know about the laminate table or the pot roast or the fruit bowl covering the crack. She met me as I actually was, a 29-year-old man who worked in mental health, who made excellent pasta, who cried at the end of certain movies without warning and then pretended it was allergies, who had a tendency to go very quiet when he was processing something difficult and needed people to let him do that without taking it personally. She saw all of this within the first month, and she did not call it instability. She called it depth. I remember the first time she said that. We were walking along the Schuylkill after dinner, and I had gone quiet the way I sometimes do, and she didn't push me, and after a while I said, "Sorry. I do this." She said, "Do what?" "Go away." Internally, "I know it's annoying." She said, "It's not annoying. I just watch you go somewhere and then come back, and I always wonder where you went." I said, "When I was a kid, my mom used to call it being unstable." Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your mom was wrong." I didn't say anything. She said, "You're one of the most stable people I've ever been around. You know who you are. You hold space for other people without losing yourself in it. You don't flail. You go quiet and you come back, and you're always the same person when you come back. That's not instability. That's depth." I stopped walking. Right there on the path by the river I stopped, and I looked at this woman I had known for 6 weeks, and I felt something shift in my chest, not break open, not collapse, just shift, the way a house settles in the cold and you hear the creak of it and realize the structure is sound. I think that was the moment I actually believed it. Fully. For the first time. I was stable. Not because I'd never been in pain. Not because I'd never struggled. Not because I'd built some impenetrable wall between myself and feeling. Because I had gone through the fire and I had come out knowing who I was. We got married 18 months later. Small ceremony, Priya's parents, her brother Rohan, Ashvin, a few close friends. My parents were there. My grandmother Loretta was there. My cousin Britt was there, which I had mixed feelings about, but Priya reminded me that you can't curate your family, only your relationship with them. My mother cried at the ceremony. I saw her. She was sitting in the second row with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes wet, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw underneath the performance to something real, something that might have been pride or regret or just the weight of time. She looked older. They both did. My father sat beside her with his arms crossed, not in resistance but in the way he always sat, as though waiting for something to need fixing. Priya and I stood at the front of that room in front of the people we loved, and we made promises to each other, and I meant every one of them, and somewhere behind my sternum I felt 17-year-old Nolan, standing in the kitchen with his hand on the refrigerator door, and I thought, look where we ended up. After the ceremony, my mother hugged me. She smelled like her same perfume, rose water and something powdery, and her arms held on longer than they usually did. She didn't say anything. She just held on. I let her. There is a particular experience that I have had many times over the past decade, and I want to describe it carefully because it is the heart of what I want to tell you. I walk into a room, a family gathering, a holiday dinner, a birthday party for one of my cousin's kids, and my parents are there, and my Aunt Phyllis is there, and my grandmother Loretta, who is 82 now and sharper than anyone gives her credit for, and who, I learned only 3 years ago, had actually pushed back on my mother that Sunday in August, had said, Linda, the boy just lost his friend and been ignored. And there is a quality to the air in those rooms that I recognize. It is the quality of people expecting something. They are watching me still. After all these years, there is a residue of that old story, that old identity, unstable Nolan off Nolan. We're not sure what's happening with him, and sometimes I can feel it like a low-frequency hum. The way certain family members track me across the room. The way certain questions are asked with that particular careful tone. Asterisk, how's work? How are you doing? Are you getting enough rest? Asterisk. And I stand in those rooms and I feel the ground under my feet. I am the same person I am alone. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. I don't become someone different to please them. I don't shrink into the story they wrote about me. I don't perform okayness or perform success or perform anything. I just I hold my drink and I talk to people and I laugh at things that are genuinely funny, and I don't laugh at things that aren't. And when someone says something that lands wrong, I let my face register that it landed wrong. And when someone needs to be listened to, I listen to them. I am steady. And here is the twist. Here is the part that took me the longest to understand, the part one wants you to sit with. The stability I built was not built to show them. I spent years thinking it was. I spent years running on that fuel. I will become so stable, so grounded, so unimpeachably whole that they will have to see how wrong they were. And that fuel worked for a while. It got me through the master's degree and the clinical hours and the therapy and the long patient work of learning who I was. Anger can be a motor. It drove me. But at some point, I think it was around the time Priya called me deep on the path by the school kill, I noticed that the anger had gone quiet. And the stability was still there. Still solid. And I realized that somewhere along the way I had stopped building it for them and started building it for me. The monument was still standing. It just wasn't a monument anymore. It was just me. That's the thing about revenge, when it's the quiet kind. It outlives itself. It becomes something else entirely. You set out to prove something, and somewhere in the proving you forget what you were proving and you just become the thing. And the thing is good. The thing is you. My son was born 22 months ago. His name is Leo James Whitfield. He has Priya's eyes and my ears and a laugh that sounds like something being poured, full and unhesitating. He is not yet 2 years old, and he has already taught me more about stability than anything else in my life. Here is what having a child teaches you. Stability is not about being unmoved. A tree is stable not because the wind doesn't touch it, but because the roots go deep enough that the wind can move it without tearing it from the ground. I have watched myself be moved by this small person, moved to tears, moved to rage, moved to a hilarity so complete that Priya and I have laughed until we couldn't breathe, at 2 in the morning, over a diaper incident I will not describe, and I have felt myself return every time to the same place. The same ground. That is stability. That is what the word actually means. My parents come to visit about once a month. They adore Leo in the specific way that grandparents adore babies, a little desperately, I think, as though the baby is an opportunity to do it right. My mother gets on the floor with him and makes faces that I have never seen her make with any adult human, faces that are open and unself-conscious and genuinely joyful, and I watch this and I feel something complicated that I've learned to just let be complicated. My father holds Leo with a kind of terrified tenderness. He holds him at arm's length the way you hold something very expensive and breakable, and Leo puts his small fist on my father's chin, and my father's face does something I've never seen it do. It goes soft. All the structure goes out of it, and what's underneath is just a man, old, holding a baby, trying his best. I don't know if my parents have ever talked about what they said. About unstable. About the conversations at the kitchen table, and the Thanksgiving asides and all the years of that particular narrative running through our family like a quiet current. I don't know if they even fully remember it. I don't know if they understand what it did. I made a decision a few years ago that I would not have the confrontation. Not because I was afraid of it. Not because I had suppressed the hurt. But because I looked at what I wanted from that conversation. I wanted them to say we were wrong, we're sorry, you were never broken. And I looked at whether that conversation would actually give me what I needed, and the answer was no. They would try. They would get defensive or they would get tearful, and it would become about managing their reaction to my pain. And I would have done what I always did when I was 17, I would have gotten smaller to make room for them. Instead, I said it to myself. I stood in front of the mirror in our bathroom, the one with the light Priya pic that makes everyone look like they're in a French film. And I said out loud, *, you were never broken. You were never unstable. You were 17 and you were grieving and you needed someone to see you clearly and almost nobody did. And that was their failure, not yours. *. I said it until I believed it. Took more than once. There is someone I haven't told you about yet, and I need to tell you about her, because she's the reason I'm writing this at all. Her name is Vera. She is my cousin Britt's daughter, which makes her my second cousin. She's 15, and she has the particular quality of 15 that involves existing in a state of constant beautiful excruciating rawness, where everything is felt at maximum volume and the only thing worse than your family not seeing you is your family seeing you wrong. I became aware of Vera the way you become gradually aware of things that matter, slowly and then all at once. She was at Christmas dinner 2 years ago, the last Christmas before Leo was born, sitting at the end of the table in the way teenagers sit at family events, technically present, actually somewhere else. She had her mother's sharpness and I noticed her own particular weariness, the kind you see in kids who are working very hard to be invisible and are also furious about having to. We ended up in the kitchen at the same time, both of us ostensibly getting more water. She was looking at her phone and she looked up when I came in, and for a second her face did what faces do when they're surprised by the presence of another person and haven't had time to arrange themselves. She was just there, just fully and unguardedly there, and I could see that she was unhappy. Not crying. Not dramatic. Just unhappy, the way you're unhappy when you've been carrying something heavy for long enough that you've forgotten what your shoulders feel like without it. I said, "You doing okay?" She said with the speed of someone who's had to say it too many times. "Yeah, fine." I said, "You don't have to be." She looked up from her phone. A different kind of looking. I said, "I'm serious. It's Christmas dinner with our family. You're 15. Nobody's doing great." She almost smiled. "Not quite, but close." I said, "Do you want some of those little cheese crackers? Because I found them in the back of the cabinet and I'm absolutely taking them, and you're welcome to be my accomplice." She said, "Sure." We stood in the kitchen eating crackers for about 10 minutes. I didn't ask her what was wrong. I didn't tell her it gets better. I didn't offer any of the things adults offer teenagers when they're suffering that are really just attempts to stop having to witness the suffering. I just stood there, eating crackers, being a person in the room. Before we went back, she said, quietly, like she was testing whether the words were real, "My mom told my grandma I've been acting out." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I haven't been acting out. I've just been feeling a lot. And apparently that's the same thing." I stood with that for a moment. I could feel the specific weight of it, 17 years of carrying my own version of that exact sentence. I said, "Vera, feeling a lot is not acting out. It's just being alive and paying attention. The people who don't feel a lot aren't actually more stable than you. They're just noisier about being quiet." She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "That's a weird way to put it." I said, "Yeah, but is it wrong?" She thought about it. Said, "No." I said, "You're not broken. Just so you know. Whatever they're saying about you, whatever word they're using, you're not broken." She didn't say anything, but she held on to those crackers for another minute before we went back in, like she was giving herself time to decide whether to let the words in. I think about her a lot. I text her occasionally, just low-stakes things, articles about things she's mentioned she's interested in, or dumb memes that land just right. She responds sometimes with one word and sometimes with 3 paragraphs and sometimes with a voice memo where she talks for 8 minutes straight about something that matters to her. I listen to all of them. I know I'm not saving her. That's not what this is. She's going to have to do what I did, go through it, come out knowing who she is, build the ground under her own feet. I can't do that for her. But I can be the person in the room who doesn't call her broken. I can be the person who was never called broken by his family but was, and who survived it and kept the lights on inside himself, and who can look at a 15-year-old girl eating crackers in a kitchen and say without performance or pity or agenda, "You are not what they say." That is something. It is not everything, but it is something. I think a lot about what it cost. Not to my parents. I'm not interested in tallying what it cost them to be wrong. I mean what it cost me. The years of work. The years of therapy. The years of sitting with Dr. Bauman in the winter sweater rotation, letting silences go until the truth filled them. The years of choosing over and over not to let the narrative be theirs. It cost more than it should have. That's the honest answer. It should not have been this much work for me to know that I was okay. It should not have required a master's degree and 150 therapy sessions in 17 years and a woman on a riverside path calling me deep before I fully believed that I was not what my mother said at the kitchen table. That cost is real. I don't want to dress it up. And at the same time, and I want to hold both of these things at once because this is the actual truth, not the easy version. I am grateful for who I became. Not grateful for the harm. Not grateful for the label. Not grateful for the nights of lying face up on my bed wondering if I was fundamentally malfunctioning. None of that. I am not one of those people who thanks their trauma for making them interesting. Trauma is not a gift. It's just a thing that happened and that you either work through or carry wrong. But the work. I am grateful for the work. The long patient labor of learning yourself. The specific piece of knowing, not performing knowing but actually knowing who you are, what you value, where your ground is. The thing Dr. Bauman was trying to help me find, that Ms. Okonkwo pointed me toward, that Priya named, that is mine now. It belongs to me in a way that nothing was able to give me and nothing can take away. Not even my parents' story. Especially not that. I want to tell you one more thing and then I'm going to let you go. Last spring my mother called me on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, which was unusual. And the unusualness of it made my stomach drop the way unusual things do when you've spent your life waiting for news to change. But it wasn't bad news. She just called because she said she'd been thinking. She said, "I was cleaning out the house and I found some of your things from high school. And I found a picture of you and Jonah from I think 8th grade. At the beach." I didn't say anything. She said, "He was a good kid. I don't think I ever said that to you. After. I don't know that I handled that well. That year." I said, "Mom." She said, "I just wanted to say. He was a good kid and I know you loved him and I'm sorry I didn't. I'm sorry I wasn't more." She stopped. The way people stop when they get close to something they don't have the vocabulary for. When the feeling is larger than the words they've been given. I said, "I know." She said, "Are you okay? Are you actually okay?" Not the way I used to ask. I knew what she meant. She meant, not the surveillance, not the monitoring, not the old inventory of whether Nolan was functioning correctly. She meant something else, something realer. I said, "Yeah, Mom, I'm actually okay." She said, "Good. You always were, I think, even when I couldn't see it." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I sat with it the way you sit with something that has been a long time arriving, not rushing to feel a certain way about it, just letting it be there. She's not going to become a different person. I know that. She's not going to have a transformation scene. She's not going to apologize for everything that happened, fully and specifically, and in the way that would be most satisfying to hear. She's my mother, limited and human and working with the tools she has. But she made that call. On a Tuesday. Because she found a photograph. And something in her reached toward me. I let it land. Here is what I know now at 34. With Priya asleep upstairs and Leo in his crib with his fist curled under his chin and the oak table from Vermont in our kitchen and the rings from mugs that belonged to a stranger. Stability is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the presence of yourself, continuous and unshakable. Through all the weather that life moves through you. You can be moved and still be stable. You can grieve and still be stable. You can feel things at maximum volume and still be stable. You can hear someone call you broken and still be stable, because stability does not depend on what other people say about you. It depends on what you know about yourself. And here is the hardest part, the part one wants you to hold if you're reading this because you've been called something that isn't you, because someone you love told a story about you that was wrong, because you spent years trying to outrun a word someone threw at you in a kitchen or a living room or a Sunday dinner table with a fruit bowl covering the crack. The proving doesn't work. Not the way you think it will. You can become the most stable person in every room they ever walk into, and you can do it for years, and it will not give you back the thing they took. The word once spoken echoes. You can change the room it echoes in, but you cannot unspeak it. What you can do is something better than outrunning it. You can become so thoroughly, so deeply, so unapologetically yourself that the word no longer has an address. It arrives and there's nowhere for it to land. It looks for the 17-year-old at the refrigerator, and he is not there anymore. He is somewhere else, held, loved, known, full, and the word just falls. That's it. That's the whole of it. The ground under your feet is yours. Nobody can take it. Not even the people who told you it didn't exist. For Jonah. For Vera. For anyone who was called something that wasn't them and had to spend years finding their way back to who they actually were. You were never broken. Just so you know. And for Mizadiz Okonkwo, wherever you are. You said the right thing. You stayed. That's everything.